Titans. I'm genuinely so gassed to bring this build to you, just because I've seen so much talk online about how Titans are just the melee class, and I think this shows that you've got to dig a little deeper and build craft a bit smarter, and you'll find Titan has some amazing options that let it play at range while still being a real powerhouse. You'll get a load of Transcendence, your Transcendence can give entire supers back, and then that super can go straight back into fueling your Transcendence for even more supers. And just for fighting, you don't have to do anything else but fight like you normally would. You pretty much always have a 25% weapon damage boost that's stacked on top of Radiant. Plus the build's able to apply loads of crowd control through its abilities, as well as Electrified Snare during Transcendence, and it has really consistent ways to stay healthy in fights. And everything I just mentioned, again, can be done from a distance. This build doesn't need you to close the gap, although it still does really well if you do want to play the build more aggressively. It's a refreshing playstyle for Titan, considering a load of their kit has been so hyper-focused on being up close. That's enough intro though, let's do some build stuff. The whole idea of the build is to use Transcendence and its ability regen to build up some insanely fast supers and have loads of uptime on weapon damage boosts. And the way we're doing this is through Doomfang Pauldron. On landing 2 to 3 Void kills within 10 seconds of each other, you get a stack of Void Weapon Surge for 11 seconds that maxes out at 4 stacks. Any Void kills at max stacks will refresh the timer, and any powered Void melee kills will instantly give you 4 times Void Weapon Surge. But importantly, that powered melee Void kill not only gives max stacks of Void Surge, but also gives you 20% super energy on kill once per melee use. And this is why the build going forward has such a focus on Transcendence. Titan doesn't really have a way to scam out abilities, but in Transcendence, we absolutely do. We get the base increased regen that Transcendence gives, but also the ability regen by dealing damage with a grenade gives melee regen, and vice versa. For the melee that's actually proccing Doomfang's effect though, we've only got one Void melee choice in Shield Throw. It's a throwable melee, and for every enemy it hits, it's going to give you a 15 HP Void Overshield. It's great for keeping you healthy in fights, and it does some decent damage too. But the most important thing here is that you always try land a kill with Shield Throw. It's an instant 25% weapon damage boost and a flat 20% super chunk. Even in Transcendence, you're really wanting to make sure that you land your kills with this melee, otherwise you won't be seeing the super regen, which is what this build is all about. Plus, that super builds into giving you more Transcendence, which makes it even more important. But to support the melee and getting kills, we're taking Knockout as our first fragment, where on dealing damage to an enemy below 30% HP, or breaking a shield, you get increased basic melee damage, increased powered melee damage, extra lunge distance, and basic melees now count as arc. You also restore a portion of health on melee kills depending on what tier of enemy you kill, and any melee kill gives you amplified. The powered melee damage is really why we're taking this, to make Shield Throw more reliable in securing kills, as well as healing and amplified. And Diamond Lance is going to be your second aspect, where on killing an enemy with an ability, shattering an enemy, or getting stasis weapon kills, you spawn in a stasis lance, which can be thrown to freeze in a small area, or slammed into the ground to freeze in a larger area. This is here to set up easy shield throws, and it gives the build some solid crowd control. Plus, it's a bit of dark damage, which helps out for dark Transcendence. And the second place we're also getting dark damage from is our grenade, where we're taking Glacier Grenade. The shatter damage can make a lance, and it gives a really solid chunk of dark Transcendence energy too, which the build definitely needs. As for your super, this is entirely up to you, but there's an argument to be made for 3 specifically. First, you could take either one of the 2 Darkness supers. They're both tier 2 cooldown supers, but Doomfang doesn't really care about them. It's always going to be a flat 20% super chunk on a Void melee kill, so you technically get more bang for your buck by using a higher cooldown super. But more importantly, these supers are dark damage, and as we're wanting Void weapons to benefit from Doomfang's surge buffs, having extra dark damage in the build is really nice to get that Transcendence easier, which goes right back into fueling your super regen. On top of that, both Blade Fury and Glacial Quake give you back a melee charge on the super ending, letting you chain together more shield throws, which is even more super regen. But Twilight Arsenal is also a really solid pick here. The super's void damage, which means any kills you land on either the throw or with the carryable axes afterwards, are able to trigger Doomfang surge bonuses. Quick PSA though, the axes don't benefit from Radiant or count as a melee kill while being carried, but instead is a void weapon, meaning they only trigger the regular surge stacks from Doomfang. And I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, but from my testing, void weapon surges were not giving the axes bonus damage here, but Transcendence was. And for your class ability, this is really up to you. Anything works here, but I was enjoying using Thruster to proc some mods and weapon perks more often. Right, Fragments. The first one you're taking here is Faceted Blessing, where powered melee kills start health regen, and while Transcendent, it starts health regen for you and nearby allies. Void Overshield from Shield Throw works really nicely here, as any damage your Overshield takes isn't going to stop your health from regenning under it, meaning that health regen pretty consistently will reach a full heal. Next is Facet of Dawn, where powered melee hits give you Radiant, and powered melee kills give you and nearby allies Radiant. You're aiming to use your melee a lot, so having Radiant on top of your Void Surge from Doomfangs makes your weapons hit extremely hard. Plus, it gives the build another way to break barrier champ shields, which is really nice and high-end content. Facet of Purpose is for adding a bit more survivability to the build, where I'm picking up an orb, you get an elemental buff depending on your equipped super. If you're taking a dark super, it's going to be Woven Mail or Frost Armor, which are both damage resist, and Twilight Arsenal is going to give you a 22.5 HP Void Overshield. This next fragment is one you can switch up depending on your playstyle, but I still really like Faceted Protection, where if you're surrounded you get a 15% damage resist, and while Transcendent and Surrounded, you get a 32% damage resist. If you're not wanting to play as up close, you can switch this out for Sacrifice, Ruin, Command, or Solitude, all of which still felt really good, but during my time using this build, I still got some great mileage out of Protection. Although if you're using Blade Fury, Faceted Solitude would be my pick here. It's not only applying Sever, but that debuff because we have Blade Fury also means a Tangle Spawn, which is bonus dark damage. For your last fragments, you've got two options, both of which are to give more Transcendence energy. If you're wanting to run a Strand weapon in the kinetic slot, you can take Faceted Bravery, where powered melee final blows give your Strand weapons Unraveling rounds, and grenade final blows give your void weapons Volatile rounds. The debuff and damage from Unravel gives some really nice Transcendence energy, and the Shatters from Glacier count as grenade kills for Volatile, plus Electrified Snare can land some pretty consistent kills too. If you're wanting to run a kinetic weapon though, Facet of Grace here is a great choice, where you get an extra 2% Transcendence energy on kinetic weapon kills, and super kills give bonus Transcendence energy for you and nearby allies. Speaking of weapons, this build is really flexible. In your kinetic, a few honourable mentions are Kvostov or Witherhoard for great Transcendence gains, Outbreak, or anything you personally want to go for. There's so many good options here, which is why I want to say that Grace could be a flex pick fragment. But Monte Carlo gets a spotlight for dropping your melee cooldown massively, which is more supers, which is more Transcendence, which makes the build even more ability and super spammy. I think some of the most fun I've had using this build was when I was using Monte Carlo with a Dark Super. But if you're wanting to run Strand here, anything that sees meta use is going to be good. And for the rest of the setup, you're wanting Void in your energy and heavy to benefit from the Void Surge that Doomfang gives, and you've got some amazing choices here too. Graviton, Le Monarch, Buried Bloodline, Leviathan's Breath, all of them are really good. As for perks though, anything works well here, but if you're using specifically Blade Fury as your super, which is going to let you make tangles in the build, Slice is a really good way to apply Sever, which means tangle spawns. Everything I just mentioned I've used at one point or another, and they all felt good. This is pretty much just to say, use the things that you like. As long as the flavor's void in the energy and heavy, you're going to be doing good. For the mod setup, it's nothing too fancy, but it will get switched up depending on your super. On the helmets, again, depending on your super, you're wanting to run Harmonic and then the missing element you might have. So if Twilight Arsenal, add Strand or Kinetic, and if Blade Fury, then add Void or Kinetic if you choose to use a kinetic weapon in the build. For Glacial Quake, it's going to be Void and Kinetic or Strand Siphon, and for your last spot, you can go for either Hands On, Aura Special or Heavy Ammo Finder. On the arms, you're taking 1 Impact Induction, 1 Heavy-Handed, 1 Melee Kickstart. On the chest, you're wanting 2 Resist mods, matching whatever activity you're going into, and 1 Charged Up. On your legs, you're wanting 1 Recuperation, 1 Better Already, and 1 Stacks on Stacks. Then the class item is 1 Outreach, Reaper, and 1 Distribution. For your stat split, you want Resilience, then Strength, then Discipline. The reason I don't think Intellect is important here is that Doomfang always gives a flat chunk of energy, so dropping the cooldown isn't massively important when you're getting percentage-based regen anyway. For seasonal mods, if it's not Episode Echoes, you know where to skip to for gameplay tips. Elemental Siphon can work well if you're using either a kinetic weapon, or Twilight's Arsenal, or Blade Fury with a Strand weapon. Threaded Blast can work here, but you are specifically going to need Blade Fury as a way to get access to Tangle spawns, as well as a Strand weapon to break the Tangle. Void Hegemony works really well, specifically if you're using Twilight Arsenal, and the same goes for Expanding Abyss, which I'd only take if you're choosing Twilight Arsenal as your super. As for mods that every setup should run though, Radiant Orbs is free Radiant and can be stacked on top of Void Weapon Surge, and Galvanic Armor in this setup is amazing. Knockout is consistently giving us Amplified, so the 30% DR is up a lot. Then Transference and Shield Crush are solid picks here. Bonus melee and grenade damage and regen just for playing the build is really nice. And for gameplay tips, I want to get the first one out of the way, which is that this build is so rewarding for people who take the time to get used to it. It took me a while to time shield throws for getting kills and balancing out transcendence bars to get supers, but once you nail the loops this build can get, it is so rewarding, both in feeling amazing to use, but also in giving you better survivability, plus more ability and super spam. It's not a turn your brain off build, it's pretty much completely the opposite. You gotta be thinking about the things that you're doing whilst you're playing. For your supers, as I said before, Blade Fury and Glacial Quake both refresh your melee charge when exiting the super, so you can just chuck out a shield before supering, to either top up your super to get to him, or for even just some extra damage and overshield. Not that you need to do this, but you can combo shield throw, super, shield throw, transcend, shield throw, to gain up to 60% super regen from ability refreshes. And with Glacial Quake specifically, the light attack is counted as a melee, meaning it's going to be proccing anything that mentions the word melee or powered melee. Facet of Blessing goes off for health regen, Knockout gets proc for health regen, plus bonus melee damage, and amplified. The only thing that isn't getting procced here is Doomfang's Surge from melee kills, as it's counted as status. Although, speaking of Void, Twilight Arsenal is that, meaning you can throw it, pick up the axes and launch those, and you'll consistently have 4 times Void Weapon Surge after supering. But again, Blade Fury here still absolutely has a spot in the build, because it lets you make tangles from either Facet of Solitude, Unravel from Bravery, or Slice from your weapons, which means more dark damage, which is more transcendence. Outside of those tips, you really just have to get your hands on the build, and you'll figure out a lot of just different interactions and hidden features that this build has, just from playing with it. And that's it. That's the build and that's the video. I'd love to know what you think about the build, both in how strong you think it is, as well as whether you liked a build that literally isn't just punching stuff. I really hope you enjoy it though. It took me a while to put this together, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. But for now, that's it from me. I've actually got to go edit this video together. See ya!